Friday Forum. City Club is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Greg McPherson, president of City Club. Members and guests are gathered today at the Sentinel Hotel, along with all of you listening or watching on OPB Radio, Portland Community Media, or YouTube. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are AARP of Oregon, McKinley Irvin, Iberdrola Renewables, Airbnb, and Uber. Please join me in showing our appreciation for all of them. Due to the Thanksgiving holiday, there will be no Friday Forum next week. Please join us on December 4 for Emerging GOP Voices of Oregon, how a new wave of conservative leaders are breaking through stereotypes and why it matters, regardless of your political outlook. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. And now for today's program. Storytelling has exploded nationally in recent years as a performance medium, and nowhere more than in Portland, which is one of the host sites for Tell-a-bration, a festival of stories and workshops celebrated tomorrow in 33 nations around the world. We are pleased to have here today Native American storyteller Gene Tagaban, who will be featured at the Tell-a-bration event at the Multnomah Arts Center. With him are two popular local performers, Portland Story Theater co-founder Lawrence Howard and living historian Chetter Galloway. Our moderator, Mindy Netifee, will introduce them more fully after brief remarks. Mindy Netifee is co-producer of the backfencePDX storytelling series. She is a writer, poet, and storyteller in her own right, having performed and taught in over 500 venues across America and Europe. Mindy Netifee was featured in the acclaimed poetry concert documentary, The Drums Inside Your Chest, and in the Moth podcast. Please join me in welcoming today's guests.
I'm Mindy Netifee, and I do work with backfencePDX here in Portland and teach storytelling and literary arts. But we are here to talk about stories and storytelling today, and to talk about talking about storytelling, which it seems everybody's doing these days. I began listening to the public radio show This American Life in 1998, which is, I think, shortly after it had achieved syndication out of WBEZ Chicago. The theme of the show was summer camp, or something about summer camp. And the unbridgeable gap between summer camp people and non-summer camp people. I am a camp person, and there I was listening to stories about camp in my car on the radio, and I was suddenly laughing so hard I was crying, and I had to pull over, and was flooded with memories of poison oak, awkward kissing, and excruciating talent shows. I was instantly hooked. Ira Glass, the intellectual and emotional force behind This American Life, once said, "Narrative itself is like a back door into a very deep place inside of us. When a story gets inside of us, it makes us less crazy." That feels true to me. Stories make me less crazy, and they make me feel less alone. There are other reasons for the storytelling show explosion that has happened in the last decade, but that might be the most important one. So much of our lives are now centered around technology that connects us, but also paradoxically isolates us. And gathering around a fire or a stage to hear stories reconnects us in a fundamental and very human and very satisfying way. Storytelling also takes advantage of the natural way we absorb information. We respond to stories because they close the gap between the way our rational, linear brain works and our more emotional and unconscious mind. It has been argued further that we are hardwired as a species for storytelling, and that it has been critical to our survival. It seems clear that if we had to all personally be attacked by tigers to know what to do when we met a tiger, that we wouldn't be here. So even though the stories we listen to now may not be about tigers, but divorce lawyers, or our own neuroses, we still listen as if our lives depended on it. And we are, it's clear, as a species, addicted to stories. Even when we lie down to go to sleep at night and our bodies rest, our minds stay awake, telling stories. And of course, not just any story will do. We want specifically stories about conflict and strife and fatal flaws and moral dilemmas and big, juicy mistakes. If I began to tell you a story about winning a wonderful tropical vacation to a beautiful island I'd never been to, and then I went on that vacation and everything was going really well, really well. I looked great, I had a beautiful bathing suit on, the sun was shining, and then suddenly somebody asked me if I might want to fly a plane for the first time. And I said, yes, gosh, I would love to fly a plane. You would all start to feel a little tense going, okay, here we go. She's gonna crash this plane. And if instead I got into that plane and I flew to another island and it was exhilarating and that was the end of my story, you would be a little disappointed. Even though it's true that in our own lives, we only want to hear from the people we love that good things are happening to us, those stories are incredibly boring. We crave instead the stories that take us to the edge of what it means to be human in a world that is full of conflict and danger, much of which is just in our own heads. There are now hundreds of live storytelling shows happening in cities all over the Americas. There are also enough storytelling radio shows and podcasts that any top 10 list will leave some juicy ones out. In Portland alone, we have The Moth, we have backfencePDX, Mortified, where people read their own diaries and other artifacts from their adolescence, Mystery Box, which people tell sexy stories at, the Portland Storytelling Guild, the Portland Story Theater and their Urban Tellers show, Russian Roulette, a show called Yarn, and more. Tomorrow, as you heard, Portland will be a host site for Tell-a-bration, a festival of stories and workshops that will be celebrated in 33 nations around the world. But you don't have to wait tomorrow to hear any stories because, of course, we have 3 gifted storytellers here with us today to regale us with their own tales of hopefully not just winning the lottery and everything turning out okay. For those of us just tuning in, you're listening to OPB. I'm Mindy Netifee here with storytellers Gene Tagaban, Lawrence Howard, and Chetter Galloway at City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. And now, without further ado, I would love to introduce our first storyteller. Using his gift of storytelling, dance, and music, Gene Tagaban travels across the country performing, presenting, and facilitating workshops on prevention, empowerment, leadership, relationship building, communication, self-awareness, spirit, and honor. He has been a featured teller at the National Storytelling Festival in Tennessee and festivals in the Kansas City, Berkeley, St. Louis, and Singapore. He is also featured in the films Shadow of the Salmon and Sherman Alexie's The Business of Fancy Dancing. He had the opportunity to perform with the Dalai Lama in the presence of an audience of 16,000 children at the Seeds of Compassion gathering in Seattle, and he will be performing tomorrow evening at the Multnomah Arts Center as part of Tell-a-bration. Please welcome Gene Tagaban.
Hey yo, 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 ha. Raven was walking along the beach It was a time when there was no spirit. Everything was just like shells, empty, no spirit. Raven, he looks far out there into the ocean, and he sees an island of fire throwing flames into the sky. Raven, he wants to get that fire for all the people of the world, but he doesn't know how. Raven's brother, Hawk, comes walking along the beach. Hawk, he has a long beak. He's proud of that long beak. Raven asks him, "My brother, can you help me?" "What you want me to do?" says Hawk. "I want you to get that fire for me. How am I going to do that?" "I'll fix it for you," says Raven. So Raven, he goes up into a tree, and he gets a branch, and he puts some pitch at the end of that branch, and he sticks it into Hawk's long beak, and he gets some roots, and he ties it in there, and he tells him, "Now fly out there, my brother, and get that fire. What you are doing is important. It's for all the people of the world." And he says, "Igo ayakwan." That means have courage, be brave. What you are doing is for all the people of the world. And so Hawk, he flies out there. He's flying a long time, and he gets to that fire, and he flies through it once, twice, 3 times. And on that 4th time, that fire shoots up into the sky. And Hawk, he flies through it fast. He flies through so fast that he gets that fire and has not even burnt himself. And now Hawk has that fire and is flying back to shore and is tired. He's tired. He's been flying a long time. And that fire that he has starts to burn bright and hot, starts to melt Hawk's beak, melt it down to the curved beak. It is now that one long, straight beak, now just a tiny curved beak. And although Hawk is hurting, he's suffering, but he hangs on to that fire because he knows what he is doing is for all the people of the world. And tears are running down Hawk's face, but he hangs on to that fire. Raven sees his brother having troubles, and he yells out to him. He says, "Igo ayakwan, my brother." That means have courage, be brave. What you are doing is for all the people of the world. And so Raven, he flies out there, and together Raven and Hawk, they fly back to shore. That's when Raven, he takes that fire from Hawk. He takes that fire, and he throws it into the rocks. He takes that fire, he throws it into the trees. He takes that fire, he throws it into the ocean, into the rivers. He takes that fire and he throws it into all the animals out there. He takes that fire and he throws it into the human beings. And now we all have that fire that Hawk suffered to bring to the people. But more than that, you see, we all have that spirit. We all share that spirit. And that's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing here. We're all sharing that spirit. That spirit. So go out there and light the fire in the hearts of the people. Light that fire in the hearts of the people. And see the Spirit shine. Yo, are you way? Yo, are you way? Hoo, hoo, hoo.
Thank you, Gene Tagaban. And now, for those of you just joining us, you are listening on OPB to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Mindy Netifee here with Gene Tagaban, Lawrence Howard, and Chetter Galloway for a special forum on storytelling. I would like to now welcome to tell the next story Lawrence Howard, co-founder with his wife Lynn Duddy of the Portland Story Theater, which is best known as the creator of the Armchair Adventurer series, a meticulously researched, rich repertoire of adventure, personal, and mythic tales about real people that he admires and who inspire him. Please join me in welcoming Lawrence Howard.
I know it might be hard to believe looking at me now, but I was one of the nerdiest kids ever to walk the face of the earth. Okay, I was one of those kids that wore my pants up around here, up around my armpits. I had a crew cut, that stood straight up. And my ears were so large that my own father used to tell me that I looked like a Buick with the doors open. I was also one of those kids that would just burst out crying at the drop of a hat. And to make matters worse, I had skipped a couple of grades and I was 2 years younger than all the other kids that I went to school with. So when I started junior high, when I started the 7th grade, I was all of 10 years old. And I was a natural target, right, for all the jocks and the hoods and all those kids at school. I was that kid that went through junior high school with the little scrap of paper that says "kick me," like permanently taped to the seat of my pants. Now, the school that I went to was a junior high and a high school all in one building. So here I am, this dweeby little 10-year-old with the pants up to here, and I'm walking around in the halls with kids who are, 16, 17, 18 years old. And I cannot tell you how many times I had my books knocked out from under my arm or how many wedgies I received during my junior high school career. I probably could apply to the Guinness Book of World Records, right, for the most wedgies ever. But those were not the worst things that could happen to you in junior high school. It was rumored, it was whispered in low voices that sometimes the hoods would get hold of a nerdy little 7th grader down in the locker room and they would throw you under the scalding hot water of the showers. Now, the gym was the scariest, the most dangerous, the most unsupervised place in the entire school. The gym teachers had an office there in the gym down under the stairs, but they never came out and supervised in the locker room. And so it was like Lord of the Flies down there, right? Kids were getting beat up and picked on and bullied all the time, but the gym teachers never did anything about that. So here we are, it's one day just a few weeks into the beginning of the school year. It's probably late September, and there I am down there in the locker room, down there in the belly of the beast. And gym class is over, and I'm getting changed and putting my regular clothes back on. And I put on my shirt and my pants and my white socks, and I put on my penny loafers, my brand new penny loafers. They were that beautiful, rich cordovan mahogany color, right, with real leather and those hard soles that would clack when you walked down the halls of the school, and that slit in the top where you would put the shiny penny for good luck. Oh, man, they were so cool. Earlier that year, in the summer, just before the school year had started, I had begged my mom to take me out shopping and buy me a pair of penny loafers because, nerdy as I was, I knew that it would have been social suicide to show up for the 7th grade in those soft-soled suede hush puppies that I had worn all the way through elementary school. So I put on my new penny loafers and I did my hair in the mirror on the inside of my locker door, and I reached into my locker to grab my books, and that's when I felt somebody grab me from behind, around the chest, under the arms, and I turned around and looked, and it was Kevin Stack, one of the hoods, one of the 9th graders. And before I could say anything, around the corner of the bank of lockers, here comes Frank Itala, another one of the hoods, a 9th grader. But Frank Itala has been left back so many times that he's like way too old to be in the 9th grade. He's like 22. He looks like a thug from The Sopranos, right? And before I can say anything or get my mind around what's happening, Frank Itala gathers up both my legs, and they lift me up, and Itala calls out over his shoulder. He says, "Turn on the hot water!" And they pick me up, and they start to carry me off in the direction of the showers. This is it. This is my worst nightmare. I was just absolutely terrified. I tried so hard not to cry. I knew that if I cried, I would never live it down, but I couldn't help it, and I burst out sobbing, and I yelled out, let me go, leave me alone. But my crying only fueled their cruelty, right? And they started to taunt me, and they're carrying me off towards the showers, and I twisted and struggled and squirmed with all my 10-year-old might. And then somehow, suddenly, one of my legs came loose from Frank Itala's iron grip. And I swung and I kicked and I flailed that leg around with all my might. And then all of a sudden, bang! Somehow, I kicked Frank Itala in the mouth with the hard-edged sole of those penny loafers, and I split his lip and I knocked out his 2 front teeth. Everything went into slow motion. I saw this look of complete and utter astonishment come over Frank Itala's face, and a trickle of blood came down his lip and down the front of his white shirt. He let go of my other leg, and then Kevin Stack called out, "Oh, no." And he let go of me, and I fell to the ground, and I hit my head on the hard concrete floor, and then I curled up in the fetal position into a little ball, and I thought, okay, this is it. This is when they start to kick me, and they stomp me to death. But they didn't. They turned and they ran out of the gym, and I heard their footsteps going up the stairs and out the 2 big heavy metal doors that went out to where the track and the football field were. I lay there on the floor, sobbing, trying to catch my breath. A huge crowd of kids had gathered around me, but nobody made a move to help me. I suppose that I should have felt like some kind of a hero, right? Having vanquished my enemy. But the truth is that now I was more afraid than ever. I mean, if I had killed Frank Itala, that would have been one thing, right? But having inflicted upon him an injury short of death, now I was terrified. Oh my God, now he'll really hate me. He'll kill me. He'll kill me. My life is over. But the truth is that Frank Itala never came near me again. I mean, I would see him in the school sometimes. I would cross his path in the cafeteria, in the hallway, even sometimes down there in the locker room. And he would always give me the finger, and he would make the hate face, you know, and he would say terrible, terrible things to me about what he was going to do to me. But the truth is that he never came near me again. And a couple years later, when Frank Itala finally dropped out of school, never to be seen by me again, the poor SOB had still not gotten his 2 front teeth fixed. But the really crazy part of this story, the part that I can still hardly get my head around all these years later, is that kicking out Frank Itala's front teeth somehow earned me the respect and admiration of my other tormentor, Kevin Stack, right? I mean, did he really think that I had done that on purpose? Could he have believed that that was some kind of an act of courage or strength or even defiance? I mean, the truth is that it was motivated by sheer abject terror. I don't know what he thought about that. I mean, it's not like he or I ever had a conversation about that or anything else. But I do know that a couple of months later, I was getting picked on again down there in the locker room after gym class, and Kevin Stack happened by. He just walked past, and he saw what was happening. He took it all in at a glance. And without a moment's hesitation, he got right in between me and those bullies. And with one hand on each of their chests, he pushed them back away from me. And he said to them, "Don't mess with my little friend over here. He'll kick your freaking teeth out like he did to Frank Itala.
Thank you, Lawrence Howard. For those of us just tuning in on OPB, I'm Mindy Netifee here with Gene Tagaban, Lawrence Howard, and Chetter Galloway at City Club of Portland's Friday Forum, where we are spending our day listening to stories. We have a third story for you now, so please welcome Chetter Galloway, who remembers being spellbound by stories his father told, took up storytelling at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation in his native Virginia, and honed the craft in the Masters of Storytelling program at East Tennessee State University. His tales of African and African American history are in demand in local schools and libraries and at festivals across the nation. Please welcome Chetter Galloway.
I'm going home on the morning train. I'm going home on the morning train. I'm going home on the morning train. I'm going home now. I'm going home now. I'm going home on the morning train. That's it. Don't get excited, y'all. I'm serious. Don't get excited. That's what they told us. Mr. Jones, it's only urban renewal. There is no need to get all excited. Urban renewal? Well, I got another word for it. I call it Negro removal. And I can't believe they're giving us a 90-day notice to move from our homes, especially after the last time they told us, don't get excited. When Jane and I moved over here to Larrabee, this was going to be the place where we set our roots, build our home, and live that American dream. But now, because of this road they putting through here and this Coliseum that they talking about, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And you know, I guess that just goes to show you that there's one constant in life. It ain't death, it ain't taxes, it's change. And granted, I'll admit, change is what I was looking for when I moved here so many years ago with me and my wife, Jane. We were both young, still had a lot of years on us. We were in search of a new opportunity from the sharecropping that we were doing in the South. And along came a man named Henry Kaiser, who said if we were willing to move to Oregon, that he'd provide us a way there, he'd provide a way to stay, and get this now, y'all, wages up to $1 an hour. I mean, who wouldn't jump at that? Well, Jane and I, even though we'd never been out of the state of Georgia, decided, you know, this might be our chance to live that dream that we'd wanted for so many years. So we packed up our bags like we were instructed and went on to the local train depot. Now, being that we never traveled before and traveled out in the state, we were surprised when we got to the depot that there were two cars. You know, one for whites, one for coloreds. And in many ways, this was a sign of things to come. Now, as we boarded our car, we began to run into people who were coming out to Oregon too, and a lot of them became our circle of friends when we were finally to get arrived here in this great state. Why, there was Big Al from Alabama. He was thin as a rail, tall as a light post, but had a heart the size of Texas. Then there was Arthur from Arkansas. The man talked so much, we used to call him Motor Mouth. He never shut up. And from way down deep in the Lone Star State was Miss Tess. Now, she was a great big gal with a great big crush on Duke Ellington. All across the country, all we heard was, when I marry my Duke, child, I'm going to be the Duchess of Ellington, honey. Now, when we got here, we were surprised by a few things. It took us about a week to get here on what we call that Kaiser caravan. Now, don't get me wrong. I've always been around white folks. I just wasn't used to seeing so many in one place when I got here. And with that came the signs you know, the more things change, they say the more they stay the same. We saw the "we cater only to white" sign, white trade only, colored entry and rear. In many ways, it felt like we'd never left the South. Now, our final destination was going to be Vanport, which was built solely to house workers like myself and Jane for the duration of the war. Now, the housing we were promised was no more than 4 walls and a roof. And I tell you the truth, the walls were so thin, you could hear your neighbor sneeze clean through them. Now, luckily, we didn't have to stay in the homes that long because there was always some activity. People were always working and coming and going. Why? We could turn out a ship in as little as 23 days. One time, we turned out a ship in as little as 10 days. And when we weren't working, we'd find our way down to the avenue. You know, that's where all the activity was, like the social spots like McElroy's or the Savoy, or even a few Tom Johnson joints for those who wanted to go there, like the Keystone Cafe. So that was our life when we were up here building ships. We worked, we played, and as they say, we prayed. Now, after the war was over, there weren't as much need for shipbuilding, so some people like Al lost their job and went on back home. Myself and Jane and Tess, we stayed on a while, and Arthur actually found a job as a waiter. And though our status of living changed a little, we were still able to put away some money for a home. And we were doing pretty well until the flood came. And I remember it was just like yesterday. You know, living in Portland, you get used to a lot of things. The gray skies, the always overcast clouds, and of course, the rain. And this year, we'd gotten some unusual weather. Early on in the year, there'd been a big snowfall. And now that the season had changed to spring, that snow began to come down off the mountains and melt and flow into the rivers and streams around Vanport. Now, keep in mind, the way Vanport was situated alongside the Columbia River, it was like being at the base of a soup bowl. And in certain places, particularly to the west, there were temporary dikes holding back those walls of water. And people often wondered, what might happen if we got a big rainfall and those waters swelled up like a big old blister and popped? Well, that morning of the flood, word was sent around. Dikes are safe at present. You will be warned if necessary. And above all else, watch this now, watch this. Don't get excited. Well, around 4 in the afternoon, everybody had reason to be excited. The sirens went blaring off all over the place. And I said, Jane, it's time to go. We'd already packed a few bags and went outside to check on Arthur and Tess. And once we got them all together, we followed a whole bunch of other people who were heading to the east side of the city. We made our way over to Denver Avenue, where there was safer and higher ground. And once we were confident we were at a safe spot, I looked back. And if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed a word if you told me. There was Vanport, our home for so many years, being washed away before our eyes. Those cracker box houses, we called them, were no match for those flood waters, as they ripped them off their foundation, tossed them up in the air, and shattered them into pieces. Those boards and beams snapped like twigs between people's fingers. It worked its way around the whole city and tossed over vehicles and such. And in just a few moments, a matter of mere minutes, it was gone, washed away, wiped off the face of the earth. And there we were, thousands, men, women, boys, girls, helpless, hopeless, and now homeless. In a city that didn't know what to do with us, in a city that didn't want us. If it wasn't for some agencies like the Red Cross, Jane and I wouldn't have been able to find temporary housing until we were able to move over to Larrabee. But now we're being told that my house, my neighbor's house, the barbecue joint, and the church are all in line of this urban renewal. So I don't know what Tess is going to do. I'm not quite sure what Jane and I are going to do. It just seems like no matter where we are or what we do, we're always a part of a community that's on the move.
Thank you, Chetter Galloway. For those of us just tuning in on OPB, I'm Mindy Netifee here with Gene Tagaban, Lawrence Howard, and Chetter Galloway at City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. And I think we have a little time to have a discussion and talk a little bit about storytelling. Gene, perhaps I can ask you a question first. Tell us in your own words what you think the power of storytelling is.
I got to find my own words.
Dig deep.
As opposed to the words of my ancestors, and oftentimes the power of storytelling, that's interesting because he said find your own words. Because oftentimes as Native people, indigenous people, we speak through the words of our ancestors. And oftentimes they say, this is not me, this is my uncle speaking. This is my uncle talking, or this is my grandfather or my auntie. And so that's interesting when you said through your own words, because it's the power of story comes from our ancestors. And the power of story is story, and we are story, and you are story. And how we relate to the world is through story, our understanding. So story, the power of story is you know, and often these old stories, these traditional stories, folk tales, myths that people call them, that those stories, you know, our ancestors, and I say our ancestors, and that means all of us, not just me as a Native person, indigenous, Aboriginal, tribal person, who we are all tribal people, if we go back far enough, but those traditional stories, those old stories that all of us had, I truly believe that our ancestors were so brilliant that they're geniuses. And you take a look at some of those old stories that they were actually talking about what is relevant in the world today. But the only way they can describe it was through their own frame of reference back when they lived. They couldn't talk about traffic. They couldn't talk about airlines or any of this stuff. Even the internet, they didn't have an idea what it was, but they did because they were so connected with everything around. They had less distractions. And things just came to them in an intuitive way. And so if you take a look at some of these old stories, I truly believe that they are describing of the events that are going on today. Because they're connected. And story connects you. And that is power.
Thank you, Lawrence Howard. With some applause, actually, of course, for Gene Tagaban. Lawrence, what do you think makes a great story? What's the difference between a series of things that happen to you and a great story?
Well, it relates back to what you were talking about earlier when you were up at the podium. A great story has to have conflict in it. It has to have some kind of a problem or a situation or something that needs to be endured or overcome or sorted out or dealt with. And it's the transformation of the teller by virtue of having gone through that conflict or that problem or that situation that makes the story really satisfying. And it's seeing that change in the teller from the beginning of the story to the end, even if it's very subtle, even if it's just a very subtle shift of attitude or perspective. That's what makes a story really interesting. When a story, like you said, is just kind of a series of anecdotes, a series of this happened, this happened, this happened, that kind of leads to the question, okay, and so what? And that's what we sometimes call a so what story. So a good story answers the question, so what?
Indeed, indeed. Chetter Galloway, to bring you into this discussion, what stories do we need to hear right now in our culture?
I think we need to hear stories of healing, stories of compassion, stories of working out our differences across cultural lines. One of the great things about storytelling is that the stories travel from one culture to the next. And with that traveling, it satisfies the need of what that particular culture is working on at that time, what they're trying to overcome, what they're trying to accomplish, and what they're trying to complete that hasn't yet been done. So I really enjoy finding those healing stories. A lot of times they're personal stories that bring out something you've overcome, and you never know who in the audience is going through that exact same thing that that you just shared with them. And when they receive it, it's a wonderful thing, beautiful thing.
So true. Perhaps any of you can answer this question if you would like to. What would you say to someone, as the masters of storytelling that you are, someone who thought maybe they wanted to be a storyteller, thought they might have the gift in them? Where should they begin?
I'll start at home. You know, I always ask this riddle for many audiences, and it's quite simple. What's the shortest story that's also the longest story? Your name, your life. Every day we're creating a chapter, every second, every minute. There's something in your life that's compelling enough to make a story. If not, then many of us in the room probably shouldn't have a heartbeat. But there's a story there that we can share out of our lives that's relevant to someone else.
I would add that, you know, now in 2015, with the explosion in the popularity of storytelling, there are a lot of storytelling workshops being offered, and anybody who is interested in learning to tell stories can take a workshop. This year, Portland Story Theater is offering 3 workshops. We have a 90-minute, which is a very small investment of time. We have a 1-day workshop, and then we have a 5-week long series of workshops that culminates in a performance. So, and I'm sure that there are many other groups also offering storytelling workshops and classes and groups. So I think that anybody who wants to tell a story can certainly find a group that will help them be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'd like just to say is that those starting storytellers who are out there, just to know that we are all storytellers, just like Chetter said, but that you are worthy of telling this story. You are worthy of that story. and just know that you have that worthiness. You're honorable, and that you are here and you exist and you matter. And you matter. And so that's what I would tell those who are coming and they want to get into storytelling.
Yeah. It's worthy of some applause. For those of us just tuning in on OPB, I'm Mindy Netifee here with Gene Tagaban, Lawrence Howard, and Chetter Galloway at City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. And we are now going to open up to the Q&A portion of the program and allow some members of the audience here to ask questions. If you have written a question on an index card, please hold it up high so that a City Club staff can collect it from you. And we will now take some questions from the audience. As always, we invite members to the microphone to ask their question. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a benefit of City Club membership, and membership is open to everyone. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less. Hopefully not by just speaking very, very quickly, hopefully because it's a succinct question. Also, I will read at least one index card question before we finish the show. And now, please, we turn it over to the questions.
Hi, I'm Micah from NEA. I appreciate you taking my question. I was wondering what inspires your stories.
Say again, please.
I'm Micah from NEA, and I was wondering what inspires you to tell your stories.
What inspires me to tell my stories is that, again, as Chetter was saying, is about healing and about just teaching. And one of the best ways to tell, I mean, there's this way, this technique, they say a technique, this here thing is about coyote teaching, those trickster teachings. And with some of the best ways to teach, and I love teaching, is through those trickster teachings. And story is just teaches without them thinking that they're being taught. And I love that. And what inspires me is my ancestors. My ancestors, and that inspires me. And when I see yesterday I did this here program with 400 grade school kids. Now, if you can't get inspired with that, then that's inspiration there. That's inspiration there. And inspiration for me is everywhere. Everywhere. As a storyteller, I take on the storyteller mind. And so I'm always looking for stories. And I'm a mentor as well. And so I'm looking for ways to inspire me everywhere, every place, and even in my sleep. And so, inspiration just comes from me just always, everywhere. But I'm looking for it. I've opened myself up to look for inspiration.
I would like to address that briefly too. What inspires me is just a desire to connect with other human beings. And I think that storytelling is really the way to do that, because a story is told eye to eye and face to face and heart to heart. And I think that storytelling really breaks down barriers, and that after we hear each other's stories, we're not strangers anymore. We know a little something about each other. And that a story that's true, a story that's real, always touches on some facet, some aspect of what it is to be a human being. So even if my story is totally foreign to your life or your experience, or vice versa, if we tell a story that's really true, that's really about what it is to be a human being, we connect. We can relate to each other's stories. And that's how storytelling breaks down barriers and builds community.
And I guess I'll address it as well. Who inspires me more than anything are the youth and the young people. They're going to be the torchbearers, or in the African American storytelling community, we say the ones who'll continue carrying the cowtail switch of stories. Because one thing that's for sure is that, as the African proverb says, a person is only dead if they're forgotten. And by continuing to tell stories, passing down what we've learned to the next generation, you keep your culture, your heritage, your history alive. And these stories that are thousands of years old, that some, even in our storytelling world now, of adult stories, personal stories, and true life stories, we may not think are as irrelevant, but they actually still are, because many times they teach just as deep lessons as the personal narratives we share today.
Great. Let's take another question.
Jim Zarin, City Club member. I was listening to this and was trying to figure out why it's so appealing to me. And I think some of the things that I thought of you've already mentioned in the questions, but it's kind of intuitive, it's non-linear. You feel like the person's talking to you, and it's about wisdom, not just facts. In a world where most of us are drowning in all those things. And it struck me, and I was wondering why it is. I mean, I remember on the CBS Evening News, we used to have Eric Severide, and on the NBC, we used to have John Chancellor, probably somebody on ABC, I can't remember, that would sort of rise up and almost do a story about what the news was about these days. Yet we don't have that now. And I'm wondering if you could explain why we've lost it in the national dialogue, you know, for example, through television, when it seemed to be on and now seems to be in need more than ever.
Well, I totally agree with you that a story is different from a recitation of facts, and I think that human beings are hardwired to make sense out of the world through story. That's the way we organize facts and make them make sense to us. Facts go here straight into the head, but a story goes straight to the heart. And I think you're right. That's why stories are so appealing, because they speak to us on a different level.
Great. Let's take the next question.
Hi, my name's Grayson Dempsey, City Club member. This was an amazing forum. Thank you all so much for your beautiful stories. I'm especially interested, Chetter, in your story, because I think that I tend to think of stories as having that traditional arc that Lawrence has had. That's more, there is a problem, there is a hero, the hero prevails, there's a lesson, we can get excited about it. But Chetter, your story was, I thought, so powerful in ending somewhat in a place that was ongoing, that there wasn't quite that resolution, that the listener is left wondering what the next step is. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about telling a story that is still ongoing and doesn't have quite the clear resolution that a story like Lawrence's might, and what that's like for you.
Okay, certainly. Well, in many actually African folk tales and African stories, the conclusion is left up to you, the listener. It's left up for you to decide if you're going to choose route A or choose route B for your resolution. In the case of the Vanport story, many of the after effects of the urban renewal and I-5 and the Coliseum are still being affected, are still in effect, I guess is what I'm trying to say today, and are still issues that are continually needing to be addressed here in the area.
Great. Let's hear the next question.
Hi, my name is Spencer Belch. I grew up on a Native American reservation, and I heard a lot of great stories from my grandfather, Semu, who was a very famous Native. And I didn't have access to things like Facebook and television in the same way that we do in the culture today. So I guess my question is kind of for all of you to address. Do you think that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, television, and all these things, mass social media, are disconnecting our generation from that art that is storytelling?
My opinion on that is yes and no. I mean, it depends on how you use it. I mean, I grew up in the village up in Alaska, my grandma's, grandpa's, and storytelling with us was, we had, when I was in kindergarten, we had storytellers come into our classroom on a regular basis and telling stories to everybody. Up there, again, it didn't matter if you're white, you're black, you're Native, or you're Asian, whoever you were, they came in there to tell stories. And with the multimedia and what's going on with Facebook and stuff, it's really about your choice on how you use it. And I've gotten many stories off of the internet and just Facebook and back and forth. But that's how I use it, because I'm seeking for stories. And again, I'm seeking for that inspiration. And it's really your choice on how you want to use it. And in many ways, it does disconnect us. And people say, oh, we're just being so connected, but we're sitting there in front of the computer by ourselves, in our house, in our rooms, wherever we're at, and we're saying we're connected so many places around the world. You can see it that way, but the way I see it is that we're being disconnected because so much of our connection can come, and our stories can come from being connected through the environment, nature. There's a thing that they say is that the knowledge. My uncle, he told me, he says, "No, the trees are holding the knowledge. The trees are holding the wisdom. It's just like a fog that comes off the land. It's just hanging there, waiting for you to walk through it. Waiting for you to finally accept who you are."
I would love to ask you a question, Chetter, from an index card from one of the audience members. And I think this is relevant to the fact that so many stories we're drawing from our own personal material, or often from stories we heard growing up. But for you, tell us about what your research process is like when you are developing a story to tell.
Okay, it depends on if it's personal or if it's like a folk tale. One of the lessons I learned early on, if you're telling a folk tale or fairy tale, is only tell a story that you like. Don't tell it because, oh, this will be good for your repertoire. You're an African-American storyteller. You have to have this in your repertoire. No, I don't. I don't like it. I never have liked it. I don't want to tell it. So it has to be something I like. I'm a bit of a trickster and a prankster myself, so naturally I'm drawn to some of those stories. Not because I like to play bad tricks or things on people, but I'm more of a comedian. I like to see people laugh. So if I can find a trickster tale that I like and something from my life, then I can merge the two. That's golden for me. That's really gold for me. And it gets even more golden when I incorporate my family members into it. But shh, don't tell them I said that.
That was the last question we had time for. Please welcome me in giving a round, join me in giving a round of applause to our storytellers, Gene Tagaban, Lawrence Howard, and Chetter Galloway. And what wonderful things we heard today about how everybody has a story to tell. And please, of course, now turn your attention to the City Club president.
This is Greg McPherson, president of City Club. In addition to our great guests who you heard and enjoyed today, please join me in thanking Ed Hershey of the Friday Forum Committee who produced today's program. We are adjourned.